Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with triple coffee sweet rolls. That's right, we're putting coffee in the dough, and in the filling, and in the icing. And if I could have figured out a fourth place to put it, we would have called these quadruple coffee sweet rolls. But don't worry, 3 hits of coffee was plenty, and these really did come out incredibly well. And to get started, we will add some instant espresso powder to the bowl of our stand mixer. And yes, instant coffee will also work, but the espresso usually has a stronger flavor. And then to that, we will add some very, very hot milk, which will heat in the pot almost but not quite to the simmering point. And what we'll do is whisk that together to dissolve our instant coffee, at which point we have to let this sit and cool down until it's just warm to the touch. Okay, something like 90, 95 degrees would be perfect. And yes, I do like to check with a thermometer, since if this mixture is too hot, it's going to kill our yeast. And as the old saying goes, dead yeast don't dance. And that's it. Once it's cooled down enough, we will toss in our yeast, followed by some salt and sugar, but not a lot of sugar, since these rolls are going to have a nice sweet filling. We're also going to need 1 beaten egg, as well as a generous amount of melted butter, which by the way makes this a very easy dough to work with, as you'll see. And that's it. We'll go ahead and finish up with our all-purpose flour. And generally we don't add all the flour in at once. Okay, we can put in most of it. And then once we grab our dough hook and put this on the stand mixer, if we need the rest, we can add it in. And by the way, I did end up using the rest of it. But the theory is it's always easier to add some flour in if things are too wet and sticky, versus trying to add more milk into a dough that's too stiff. But anyway, we'll mix that on low speed with our dough hook. And once everything comes together and that dough pulls away from the sides of the bowl, we can turn our speed up 1 notch. And then we'll knead this for about 3 or 4 minutes until we've formed a nice smooth, very soft, fairly elastic dough, which you're going to get a really good look at as I transfer it onto the work surface. And what we'll do is gather that dough together and maybe give it a couple kneads, but mostly we're just trying to form it back into a ball. And because of the butter in the dough, it's really not very sticky at all. So I didn't even bother flouring the surface. And if you are new to making doughs, you're going to find this one very user-friendly. And that's it. Once we have that balled back up, we can transfer it back into the bowl, at which point we're going to cover this and let it rise in a warm spot for 1 hour to 2 hours, or until it doubles in size. And while we're waiting, we can move on to make our sweet coffee filling, which we'll do by melting some butter on medium heat, to which we will add a touch of brown sugar, plus some high-quality unsweetened cocoa, plus another spoon of our instant coffee, or as I said in my case, espresso. And we'll go ahead and give everything a stir. And just as soon as that butter melts, and we've mixed everything together, we can turn off the heat, since we're not trying to cook anything. So once it looks like this, we are done. And then since I'm making this ahead, I'm going to go ahead and transfer it into a bowl and let it cool. But if you are going to use yours in the near future, you can just go ahead and let it cool right in the pan. And once that does cool down, we'll finish up by giving it a stir. And I'm going to show you that very soon. But before that, I'm going to go back and check my dough, which like I said, we want to have doubled in size. And we'll know it's ready if we poke it with our fingers and it deflates. And if it is ready, and mine was, we'll go ahead and transfer that onto the work surface. And then we'll use our hands to press out all the air, or as bakers like to say, degas. And we will once again roll, press, and shape that back into a ball. And that's it. This dough is ready to use. And we could roll it out and make sweet rolls if we wanted. But I'm actually going to transfer it into a bag and pop it in the fridge, since I think the taste and the texture is much better if we use it the next day. So that's exactly what I did. Oh, and then as far as finishing our coffee filling, to do that, all we need to do is stir everything together with a spoon. And as this cools, that melted butter is going to thicken up. And if we keep stirring, it's going to turn into this beautifully colored paste, which is exactly the state we want it in when we eventually spread this on our dough. So if you do make it ahead like I'm going to, you can always zap that in the microwave for a couple seconds to get it back into this state. And that's it. The next morning I pulled out my bag of dough and transferred that onto the counter. And what we'll do is press and degas that one more time, attempting to get it into some kind of rectangular shape. And once we have pressed and pushed that into something that looks like this, I am going to dust this on both sides with a little bit of flour, because we are going to roll this out nice and thin before we roll up our sweet rolls. And if it sticks to the table at that point, we can have some problems. And that's it. We'll grab a rolling pin, and we will roll this out into a rectangle, ideally 12 by 18 inches. And since rolling something that started as a circle into a rectangle is not the easiest thing, once we get it to about this point, it's totally fine to stop and use our hands to stretch the corners, just to kind of square things up. And yeah, some bakers do pull out a tape measure and get this exactly 12 by 18, and they'll even trim with a pizza cutter to get perfect square corners. So if you do want to go for that level of precision, feel free. I mean, you are, after all, the Jim Dangle of making a perfect rectangle. But that is not me, so I just roll and pull until I get it close. And that's it. Once our dough is in the size and shape we want, we can take our filling and spread it all over the surface. Except the edge we're going to roll to, we want to leave a few inches unspread. Otherwise, we might not get a proper seal. Speaking of which, once that's been applied, we're going to brush a little bit of water on the exposed dough, which will help that dough stick together. And that's it. We can finally start rolling this up. And we do want this rolled up fairly tightly, but we don't want to stretch the dough out any thinner than it already is. So we're just using enough pressure to get this rolled up nice and uniformly. And generally when we do these kind of things, the center of our roll tends to be a little thicker than the ends. So as we're doing this, we want to pay attention to that. And if we have to push those ends in towards the center so that they don't get too narrow, that's what we'll do. And of course, if the center seems like it's getting a little thicker, we can always press and push and kind of roll that towards the ends. And that's it. Once we eventually get that rolled up and we're ready to seal, I like to grab the corners of the dough with my hands and give it a little stretch, just so it's a little squarer and thinner. And we can also press down the dough a little bit along the edge. And then we'll simply finish the roll with a seam at the bottom. And then we'll use our hands on the finish roll to make it as uniform as possible. At which point I'm going to take the end of a knife and press lightly in the center to mark the halfway point. And then we'll make 2 more marks, so this is divided into quarters. And then if we score each quarter into thirds, we should theoretically have 12 equal portions. And yes, I had to speed the footage up because I took way too long to do that. And that's it. Once we have that mark where we want to cut, we are not going to cut. We are going to string. Oh yeah, we're going to take a piece of kitchen twine and we're going to use the old cross and pull, which is a super fun and perfect method for dividing these rolls up without crushing the edges, which can often happen if you use a knife. So other than eating them, this is my favorite part. There's just something deeply satisfying about doing this. And yes, there is going to be a little extra dough on the 2 pieces on the ends. So if you did want to trim a little extra off, that's fine. But that generally doesn't cause much problem, unless you're one of the people that trim the rectangle to exactly 12 by 18. But anyway, once we have that cut into 12 pieces, we will transfer those into a very generously buttered pan or baking dish. And we'll line those up in a 3 by 4 pattern. Oh, and if you're not sure your sweet rolls are going to stick, you should probably hedge your bets and put a piece of buttered parchment in the bottom, just to play it safe. All right, these ended up being fine, but I almost had a sticking problem. And then once we have those panned up, we will cover this, and we'll let those proof for about an hour or 2, or until they've just about doubled in size, which is sometimes hard to gauge, but a good indication you're close is that all those rolls have swelled up and they're now touching each other. And if everything goes according to plan, they should look something like this. And I know it does sort of look like they've already been baked, but they haven't. And to prove it, I'm now going to pop these into the center of a 375-degree oven for about 30 minutes, or until they're sort of puffed and peaked in the middle, and the edges start to get a little bit golden brown, and they look like this. And by the way, if you want to go by internal temp, you should shoot for about 200 Fahrenheit. And then before we ice these, we want to let them cool for about 15 minutes, which of course is the perfect time to make the icing, which is nothing more than some powdered sugar with enough coffee or espresso mixed in to give us the perfectly pourable texture we're going for. And exactly how thick or thin you want this is up to you, but what you're seeing right here is what I think is the perfect viscosity. And that's it. Assuming our rolls have cooled long enough, we'll go ahead and take a spoon and drizzle that over. And every single time I do this, I tell myself, just drizzle over a little bit so you can still see a lot of the roll, which always makes for better pictures. So that's what I tell myself. But my hands and wrists are terrible listeners, because once I start drizzling, I have a hard time stopping, since not only is it fun to do, and I really, really love coffee icing, but I'm always noticing a spot that seems like it needs a little bit more. And by the time I am finally done, as you can see, I've pretty much covered the top. And that's it. These are now technically ready to serve. If you like these a little bit warm, which I don't, so I let these cool all the way down to room temp before I grabbed a spatula to serve one up. Oh, and right here I got a little bit nervous and slightly concerned because it was kind of sticking, but not too badly. And I was able to remove that without any major issues. But anyway, let me go ahead and cut this one in half so you can see that gorgeous cross-section. And you can see the lines where our filling was, which has pretty much been absorbed into the roll. And then I went ahead and pulled off a piece and took a bite, which by the way is a dumb way to eat these. All right, I didn't get enough and made crumbs, which I had to clean up between shots. And that, my friends, really truly was incredible. All right, these have a beautifully light, tender texture. And then as far as the flavor goes, if you don't like coffee, do not under any circumstances make these, since these have a huge amount of coffee flavor, which again is no surprise. I mean, it was in the dough and the filling and the glaze. And no, as you may have noticed, I did not add any cinnamon to the filling, since I do not enjoy cinnamon in coffee. Okay, it reminds me of a pumpkin spice latte I accidentally took a sip of many years ago, and I'm still traumatized. But whether you add that or not, I really did think these were magnificent, which is why I really do hope you give them a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.